The Brown Mountain Lights. I was born and raised in Asheville, North Carolina, in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains, there in the western part of the state. That's where my family on both sides had been for generations. And if you drive a little over an hour from Asheville, close to Morganton, North Carolina, you enter the Pisgah National Forest and you find Brown Mountain. It's on the border of Burke and Caldwell counties. This is a long, low-lying ridge, about 2,300 feet in elevation. And there's an overlook there off of, they call it Highway 181, where you can park and look at this mountain. And here is what I once wrote about Brown Mountain. The backside of the mountain is quite lush. Scenic streams rush through crags, cutting mighty gapes through the mountain boulders. There are ferns, mushrooms, mosses, and other signs of moist life. However, as one ascends the mountain, the moisture dwindles. Many of the trees on the mountainside look sparse and dead, perhaps suffering from acid rain. The ridge is primarily composed of ordinary cranberry granite. It contains sandstone, quartz, and mica. Iron has also been found on the mountain. The area around Brown Mountain is a black bear reserve, and it's also well known for copperheads, one of the most deadly snakes in the country. The Brown Mountain area is extremely rugged. Thus, hikers and bikers in the area have died from accidents. The side of the ridge is covered with slick rock faces, especially treacherous when covered with water or fallen leaves. One of the biggest reasons the lights are still a mystery is because it's so dangerous and difficult to navigate the ridge and surrounding land. There are also some small caves and holes around the mountain. It's noteworthy that Brown Mountain is a short distance from the Linville Caverns, the only, quote, show cave in the entire state of North Carolina. Interestingly, the ridge is almost completely encircled by thrust faults. This fact plays into some of the theories regarding the lights being related to geologic movement. During the daytime, from a distance, the ridge appears quite insignificant. But at night, it can sometimes steal the spotlight from any other formation in the Appalachians. When I was a kid, I remember my father telling me about the mysterious Brown Mountain Lights, that on this ridge, these multicolored balls of light would sometimes form and float on, around, or above this ridge at night, and nobody could explain what caused them. Scientists had studied them from all over the world. But my dad was especially fond of a song, kind of a bluegrass song that had been written about this, and sung by a man named Tommy Fail. That last name is spelled F-A-I-L-E. It's called The Legend of the Brown Mountain Lights. And you should look it up and listen to that song. And what you'll find is that the version of the story in the song, and there we'll get into some of the different legends connected to the mountain, but the version is that there was a man who had some type of massive property in the area, and he liked to go hunting. And he had a bunch of slaves, so they say, in the song. And so at one point, he went out to go hunting, and he never came back. So one of his faithful servants got a lantern and went out there trying to find him. And the servant also never returned. But to this day, he's still searching. And when you see those lights on the mountain, you're seeing that ghostly lantern as he's looking for, as they say in the song, his master who died long, long ago. Okay, so that's the story in the song. And it's a very catchy song. And so, again, this is how I kind of learned that there was this weird phenomenon right down the road from me that had gained national prominence. Now it's international, but at that time it was national. When I was still a kid, I don't know, it's hard for me to say how old I was, 10, 11 years old maybe. My dad and mom got me and my sister in the car and decided, let's go see if we can see the Brown Mountain Lights. And so it was a big deal. We drove up to this overlook, and back then the overlook was very overgrown And it's kind of trashed out, really, And we were the only car there, and we were sitting there just, quietly watching this ridge in the distance. There was nobody else around, nothing happening. And sure enough, at one point, this was probably like, 8, 9 o'clock at night, we start seeing these red lights appear on the side of the mountain that sort of would flare up and then dim and then flare up and then dim. And it was just amazing, the impact that made on me, seeing these lights on this mountain and knowing that nobody can explain these. And I just wanted to know what the heck they were, right? And so that, for me, that really began my journey investigating the Brown Mountain Lights. And at this point, I consider myself the world's top expert on the phenomenon. And I say that because I own the website brownmountainlights.com. I've had it for a long, long time. It's very outdated. In fact, there's different software and everything, and some of the stuff doesn't even work on the site, but I promise I'm going to update that at some point. It's just, not enough hours of the day, but I've been on every TV channel you can imagine talking about these lights. Discovery, Travel Channel, Nat Geo. I mean, the list goes on and on. I was hired to produce a ghost tour there in Morganton, which is run every October, and it definitely features the lights. And that is thanks to Ed Phillips, who is the director of the Burke County Tourism Development Authority. He picked me and asked me to do this. Their website, by the way, is discoverburkecounty.com. You'd be amazed how much cool stuff there is to do in Burke County. But also, Ed Phillips asked me if I would write a book about the Brown Mountain Lights, a booklet, really, that they could give out. And I did that. As a matter of fact, let me just read to you the intro to my booklet here called Brown Mountain Lights, A Viewing Guide. And you can actually get this for free if you go to brownmountainlights.com. There's a place to download this as a PDF. I wrote, "The Brown Mountain Lights are a world-famous topic of mystery and debate. For more than a century, locals, tourists, scientists, and researchers have been baffled by this weird and complex phenomenon. Most people think of the lights as a wondrous, colorful display on dark ridges at night. And yet, an entire subculture associates the enigma with UFOs, underground bases, conspiracies, reality warps, and high strangeness similar to the Bermuda Triangle. And this book will focus on the display itself. Despite fascinating photographs of weird illuminations presented for years, some who have never seen the lights are convinced they don't even exist. There is only one way for you to know. You must venture out and look for yourself. I have been investigating the phenomenon for decades, and in this guidebook, I'll give you a solid understanding of the mythos behind the lights and tips on how to properly observe the mountain yourself. All the while, I will maintain a somewhat cautious and neutral view on what they may be. After all, they are a great mystery. And though there are many theories, no one knows for sure. Hence the beauty of this rare and mystical slice of Americana." There are lots of stories, lots of legends in the folklore surrounding the Brown Mountain Lights. One of them is that around the year 1200, there was some kind of a battle between two Native American tribes, the Cherokee and the Catawba. And the story goes that afterward, the maidens went out with torches burning, at night, searching for the bodies of their slain loved ones, and you can still see their torchlights burning. But historians say there's no evidence that that kind of a battle happened, so who knows? And then there's a story about a man in the early 1900s who murdered his wife and child in the area and buried them somewhere around Brown Mountain. And that's when the lights started to appear, and then the lights led the authorities to the bodies, and they ended up arresting the man. These stories go on and on. But let's talk about what scientists and researchers have given us, okay? I think we can trace this back scientifically to weird stuff happening around at least 1771. In that year, a German engineer named Gerard de Brom, he was exploring the area and he recorded some strange stuff. He was intrigued by these unexplainable sounds in the mountains. I think he said they were booms or something like that. And so in his diaries, he wonders, oddly, if the noises could be created by the spontaneous ignition of, quote, nitrous vapors carried by the wind. Okay, that's what he put. So, I mean, who knows? But that is just, one of those weird things. On September 24th of 1913, the big newspaper in North Carolina, the Charlotte Observer, published an article. And again, this is 1913. It was titled, "No Explanation. Burke County's Mysterious Light Still Baffles Investigators." And that article states, quote, "The light rises in a southeasterly direction from the point of observation just over the lower slope of Brown Mountain. First about 7:30 p.m., again about 20 or 30 minutes later, and again at 10 o'clock. It looks much like a toy fire balloon, a distinct ball with no, quote, atmosphere about it, and as nearly as the average observer can measure it, about the size of the toy balloon." It also says, "Many have scoffed at this spooky thing, and those members of the Morganton Fishing Club who first saw it more than 2 years ago were laughed at and accused of seeing things at night as a result of a common human frailty. But as more and more persons have seen it, various attempts have been made to explain the mystery." End quote. So right there, if you just look at the newspaper articles, that shows you that the lights were definitely a hot topic going back to at least around 1911. So after this kind of publicity spread, the lights were investigated at least 3 times by the U.S. government, once by the U.S. Weather Service, twice by the U.S. Geological Survey. Even the Smithsonian conducted an expedition. And in a 1922 geological survey, a scientist named George Mansfield studied the mountain and its weather conditions for weeks. And in his official report, titled Circular 646, he stated that the lights were, quote, 47% auto headlights, 33% locomotive lights, 10% stationary lights, and 10% brush fires. And many locals were outraged and felt this report was just pure hogwash because the lights had been seen long before autos and locomotives. And plus, in 1916, there was a great flood in the area that wiped out the transportation routes, and there were no trains or autos in the area for more than a week. However, the lights continued to be seen. So this gives you an idea of how seriously this phenomenon has been taken for a long, long time. And then things take a really weird twist when we start getting into the 1960s, all right? So you have all these people out there, and some are saying, well, call them what you want, earth lights, spook lights, will-o'-the-wisp, foxfire. Some people say the swamp gas, but there's really no swamp around. I mean, in 1961, Tommy Faile, as I told you, Faile, he records this hit, The Legend of the Brown Mountain Lights. I believe he sung it at the Grand Ole Opry. And in 1965, there was this guy who lived right there near the mountain named Ralph Lell, who really brought the whole Brown Mountain Lights phenomenon into the grand age of ufology. Now, Ralph Lell was a very eccentric man. He actually ran for Congress at one point and lost. But he had a little museum for tourists up there near Brown Mountain. It was called the Outer Space Rock Shop Museum. And if you drop by there, you could pick up, souvenirs. And then if you paid him a couple bucks, he would take you into the back room and he would show you what he swore was the mummified body of a little alien. Let me repeat that. He had a mummified body of a little alien. His story was that he, growing up in the area, he would sit there and he would see these lights on a somewhat regular basis. And he was trying to communicate with them. And he would start turning off and on flashlights and things. And they were sort of signaling back and forth. Like he felt he was communicating with the lights with his flashlight. And then he got some telepathic instructions that led him down this very remote trail to a sheer cliff face. And it turns out that it wasn't really a rock face. It opened up somehow and he was able to enter the mountain. And when he entered Brown Mountain, he was met there by some aliens that he described as not being like the little grays, but more of, the aliens that look kind of like humans, and that they were very friendly. And the cave was beautiful. He said the whole interior of the cave was lined with all these giant crystals. The crystal cave, he called it. And they put him on a spaceship. And then they soared out of Brown Mountain and they took him on a tour of the galaxy. And as he was zipping around the cosmos, they were showing him more or less movies that were kind of explaining to him how that humans were created and then seeded onto Earth, and how that if we don't, behave, we're going to destroy this whole thing. And, that the same message that you probably heard many times. So he was very confident in all this. And somehow in the midst of this, he said, well, I want some proof so that I can give this message to others. And he ended up with a dead body. They gave him one of their dead. And this is what you could see for a few bucks. And apparently you could even take a picture of it. There are only 2 pictures known to exist. And one of them was taken in person by Mr. UFO Timothy Green Beckley. He was there at Brown Mountain in the 1960s, and he took a picture of Ralph Lell's alien mummy, and he gave me permission to share it with you. You might say, come on, this guy has just got to be some kind of a con man, right? But the weird thing is that people in the area actually said that Ralph Lell would, he would pack a little paper bag lunch, and he would tell everybody, I'm going to go off and see my space friends. And he would just walk off into the woods and nobody would see him for 2-3 weeks. And then one day he'd come walking back out and he looked just as fresh as the day he went in. And nobody could explain, where he'd been or how he'd been surviving out there. Perhaps one of the weirdest things of all, though, is that one day, Ralph Lell, he died, and I've never gotten a clear explanation I don't know exactly what happened to him, but they said it was sudden, it was unexpected. And after that, somebody or some entity came in, bulldozed his shop to the ground. And to this day, nobody knows what happened to Ralph Lell's alien mummy. It's funny that Ralph Lell talked about meeting these aliens in this, inner world, this underground world below Brown Mountain. And then in 1990, there was a book published by the mysterious Commander X called Underground Alien Bases, in which he says that Brown Mountain is an underground base of this type. More on that sort of thing later. Just to give you an idea of how popular the Brown Mountain Lights started to become, on May 9th of 1999, there was an episode of the X-Files TV series called Field Trip that featured the Brown Mountain Lights. And, it was a very weird episode, but it was obviously ended up being connected to aliens and UFOs and all that. But when this thing was on the X-Files, a lot of people heard about it for the first time because of that. So there was this explosion in popular culture, more interest in the Brown Mountain Lights. As a matter of fact, in 2014, there was a movie made that was set at Brown Mountain, kind of a mockumentary type movie, and it was called Alien Abduction. I'm in that movie. The guy who made it, Matty Beckerman, he kind of wanted to do a Blair Witch sort of thing, where he tells the story of this family that goes up to Brown Mountain and gets abducted. But to make it seem more realistic, he actually hired me and other real experts and witnesses to just comment about the lights, and he edited that in. And to this day, there are people who contact me believing that mockumentary was real. So he must have done a pretty good job of convincing some people that was that was real. But no, that was just fiction. Okay. So anyway, when I was a teenager, when I turned 16 years old, one of the first things I did was plan my first trip to go up there with my buddies camping at Brown Mountain. And over the next 15 years, that is exactly what I continue to do on a regular basis. Camp on and around Brown Mountain. A lot of times I didn't camp right on top of it, because I wanted to get a view of the whole mountain. So I'd camp on one of these little ridges that was next to it where I had a good view of it. And at least in the spring and in the fall, oftentimes we do spring, summer, and fall. I never was up there in the winter. I'm telling you, I camped in the late fall, and it was so cold and windy up there that I just did not want to camp up there in the middle of the winter time. But let me give you an idea of what it's like to be there. All right, because yes, you have these public overlooks in the Pisgah National Forest, but you have to get a permit from the Forest Station Service there, the Forest Service Station in Nebo, North Carolina, and they give you a key so that you can open up some service roads and really drive into these places that most people don't get to go. And when you have a permit and a service road gate key from the Forest Service, and you drive forever up winding mountain dirt roads until you finally reach the service gate, the service road gate. And then you use a chainsaw and an axe to clear away old fallen trees as your four-wheel drive groans up this service trail deep onto the mountain. And then you set up your camp and you watch the sun go down. And then late that night, when it's dark and quiet, you walk all by yourself, all alone, 30 or 40 minutes, deep into those woods. Your senses are magnified. In the dim blue moonlight, you hear every twig and leaf and cool breeze. And there's a real feeling that on that mountain, right where you stand, at any moment, anything can happen. And you don't know if it's going to be good or bad. But you definitely know you are in an altered state of mind. That's what it's like to be in the dark trees and bushes on Brown Mountain by yourself at night, just waiting for something to happen. And as I mentioned before, at that time, even the overlook was neglected and overgrown and kind of trashed out. And today, I'm happy to report, the last time I was there, all that has changed. It's been cleaned up. It's been expanded. There is a nice sign there, a nice plaque that talks about the mountain, even some picnic tables. I'm very happy that it is being treated much better than it was back in those days. But I didn't just go up there with my buddies. I also was able to go up there and invite some esteemed scientists. For example, I camped up there at least once or twice with Dr. David Hackett, who was a physicist at the Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee. He was with a group called Orion, and back in the mid-70s through the mid-80s, they were camping up there, and they were investigating the lights, along with another group called the Enigma group. And he said they saw the lights many times. They were able to measure telluric currents, which is when you put some metal rods in the ground and you see that there's all of a sudden more electricity running through the rocks. They even were able to set off some dynamite to create a little tremor and claimed that doing that would sometimes trigger lights. Now, I don't think that was even legal, okay? I don't know. It probably wasn't, but they did it. They were scientists. They could, I camped up there with a forest ranger, with a rocket scientist from Ohio State University, historian, Dr. Bill Forstchen. I mean, a lot of people, very esteemed people, went up there and camped and oversaw the work that we were doing because we had all kinds of instruments. One thing that's really weird is that, if you have a Geiger counter, for example, a Geiger counter is meant to pick up ionizing radiation like alpha, beta, gamma radiation, X-rays. And I mean, that's what it's designed for. But oftentimes scientific meters will be affected by things that they were not designed to measure. And that's a weird thing that a lot of people don't think about. So, for example, you might go to a haunted house and you might have a meter, an electromagnetic field meter that was designed to measure household wiring fields, but that thing can still be affected by other fields that are outside of that particular frequency range. So, for example, with a Geiger counter, usually if you get something that's radioactive, you'll hear that pop, 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 little popcorn sound. But if you just encounter a strong electrostatic field, that will still affect a Geiger counter. But instead of going pop, 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 it starts whining and goes, and the needle just starts moving all over the place. So there were a lot of times where the Geiger counter was not displaying any evidence of radioactivity, but it would just start going nuts, meaning there was an enormous amount of electrostatic charge affecting that tube. And you can take a Geiger counter and you can hold it up to a Van de Graaff machine or something like that, and you can see what I'm talking about. We had all kinds of equipment. You can drag a magnet across the ground all around Brown Mountain and pick up all kinds of little ferrous stones, little magnetically sensitive stones. You'll be walking along, you'll see a hole in the ground. You got to be careful. You'll step in a hole that's like 3 feet deep and, a couple feet around, and you can break your leg. And you look down in the hole and you see water, just water rushing underground. And you wonder, how extensive are these little areas, right? I had a big tabletop device called a VLF detector, very low frequency detector. And you could manually scan a big range of frequencies from 0 up to 500,000 hertz. And I had it hooked to a big coil antenna. If you're a geek out there, I'll just tell you it was 1,780 feet of coil as one layer of 24 gauge wire wrapped in a span of about 21.5 inches. So this thing was tuned to 145,000 hertz. Sorry that I had to geek out for a minute, but just in case somebody finds that interesting. And when the lights would appear, we would get all this interference on this VLF device. It was never like at a consistent frequency though, but we would pick up interference, and that way we could tell this is not some kind of an ordinary light being created by like a headlight on a four-wheeler or something. And I had a spectroscope up there, and which allows you to look at a light and see what bands of color it produces on a film and try to figure out what the light is made of. It was, I never really got a good bead on a Brown Mountain light with the spectroscope. The couple times I got a glimpse though, it seemed like a pretty broad range. It wasn't like a specific thing, but I'm just giving you an idea of the things that I tried. If you go to brownmountainlights.com, you can look at this report that I released. I think it was in 2004, which really breaks down all the scientific stuff we were doing up there. So word got out that my team and I were up there conducting this level of research. And that is when the very strange people started contacting me and telling me things that I had never expected to hear. I once wrote this description of the Brown Mountain Lights. They are usually described as multicolored balls of light that either flare up from one location or move as a group through the trees. They are often reported flying or floating into the air above the mountain as well. Even though Brown Mountain has become the focus of observation, they could more appropriately be called the Linville Lights, since the phenomenon has been reported throughout the area, especially in and around the Linville Gorge, most often witnessed from Wiseman's View. The lights frequently begin as a red glow flaring into white. They can also appear as orange, blue, green, or yellow. Usually a single ball of light only lasts 6 to 10 seconds before vanishing. However, on rare occasion, they may last longer than a minute, especially when floating into the air over the ridge. The movement of the lights is somewhat unpredictable. One orb can divide into several, the smaller ones eventually combining to form a large one again. They might seem to ooze around the trees and drift over the ridge, or just dwindle and fade away, or simply wink and vanish. The illumination is most often witnessed from vantage points miles away, and because of such great distances and the fleeting nature of the phenomenon, most people cannot see specific details. Over the decades, a handful of people claim to have seen the lights up close. Yeah, I'll get back to that. And I had an experience where I saw a light that was pretty darn up close. But once word got out that, this level of interest was being revitalized, that my team and I, the Lemur team and I, we were out there and we were doing this kind of research, I started getting some very interesting letters in the mail. And I got one from a man who was a reporter with a local newspaper. And he wrote me this big, thick letter, and it had various materials in the envelope. And he said, I don't know what to do with this except send this to you. And he said that because he was a reporter in the area, that he had been contacted by a man. And basically how this began for him was he got a letter and he opened it and it said, if you want to know the secrets of the Brown Mountain Lights, call this number. So he called that number and nobody answered the phone. And this went on for days. And then finally, a guy answered the phone and it sounded like an elderly man. And they had a nice conversation, but the elderly man did not want to identify himself. And he said, I want you to meet me at the top of a trail at the top of Mount Pisgah, all right, which is one of the biggest peaks in the area around Asheville. That's where they have the broadcasting towers for TV and radio. So, it's a place that you have to make an effort to get to. So sure enough, like that Saturday or whenever, the reporter got up early in the morning and he made his way to the top of Mount Pisgah. He was supposed to meet this guy around noon at the top of Mount Pisgah. I mean, this is in the middle of the parkway, all right? And this is in the middle of the National Forest. And so when he got up there, the guy wasn't there, and the reporter ate his lunch and kind of dozed off. And when he woke up, it was like, 12:30, and he goes, oh man, hopefully I didn't totally miss out on this. So he figures I'll wait around till about 1. Well, a few minutes after that, he looks over and here is this old gentleman who comes walking up the trail, and he's got a walking stick and a hat and sunglasses. And this is the dude, right? So they have a little small talk, and then they walk back down the mountain, or travel back down the mountain. I think there was like a little tram or some kind of little train or something you could take. And at the bottom of the mountain was a black Jeep, and they got in the Jeep and they start driving, and the old man starts telling him a story. And after he assures the old man that he's not recording. And essentially the old man says, I grew up near Brown Mountain. And when I was a little boy, I used to go out and explore all the little caves and stuff in the area. And one day I crawled into a cave and I saw a light back, deep in the cave. And he said, I crawled deeper and deeper. And finally I saw this big, weird mass of blue light, kind of like squirming around or whatever. And he says, I crawled up and it was a huge clump of worms. And these worms were emitting this light. And he literally said that he described it as these worms had some kind of a flaming blowhole. All right. And so he got some and took to show his dad, but by the time he got them to his dad, they were dead. And so this old man's story was that when he got older and he got into like science class in school, he started going and he would study these worms, and he found they were producing, like methane, some kind of natural gas, and that there were these big pockets of it in the mountain. And so he started basically illegally tapping into this and had made a fortune over the years from the natural gas that he was illegally extracting from this federal property, the Brown Mountain area, and that, that's what causes the lights. Okay, now that's a weird one. There's no evidence that any of that is true. I'm not even sure if that's plausible, but that was what this reporter told me. And this was the beginning of this like cascade of bizarro stories I started to get. Now, I was at Brown Mountain myself one time, and I did look down, and sure enough, I saw a glowworm. And I was like, oh, is that one of them? And it turns out that was just a larva for a lightning bug. They have, the little glowworms are, I guess that's what they usually are. So you do see some glowing worms on the ground up there from time to time, but no flaming blowholes. And then I was up there one night at the overlook, and the 181 overlook, just watching for the lights. And there was this guy who came up there and parked his car and got out and started talking to me. And he told me that his family had lived in Morganton for decades, and they used to own a cafe. And that back in the 1980s, that one day a full bird Army colonel walked into the cafe and said that he wanted to make arrangements for them to fix meals that they would bring up to a service gate every single day for like a couple months to feed 300 to 400 men. And this was a huge deal, for a little cafe in Morganton. And they had to go to all these extents to work out logistics and, get the money they needed up front and all this kind of thing to fulfill this contract. And they said that sure enough, for like a couple months, every day, they would drive up there to this gate at Brown Mountain. A couple of MPs would meet them and take the load of food and drive off into the woods. And somewhere out there in those woods, 300 or 400 men were being fed per day, but they never saw the men. And that was also right around the time when President Ronald Reagan started discussing his Star Wars program around 1984. If you're old enough, you might remember that. The Strategic Defense Initiative, we called it the Star Wars program. And this was when the U.S. was getting really interested in trying to use satellites and space technology in order to control the security of our country from the sky, from the cosmos. I mean, I'm still not sure that we know all that they were doing. One evening, I think it was in the late 1990s, I was at the 181 overlook, and this pickup truck pulled up beside me. A guy with a beard wearing a ball cap got out, and we started chatting as we were looking at the ridge in the distance. And he told me that he had lived in that area his whole life, and that he had done a lot of hunting and had a very bizarre experience several years before. He left out sort of early one day by himself, going down a trail and a pathway into the mountains with his gun. And all of a sudden, this really big sort of camouflage looking military vehicle appeared out of nowhere and just went blazing right by him. He said, I don't think they even saw me. And he wondered, where the heck are they going? And, like a half hour later, he got to the end of this path and it was a dead end. He said, I know this thing didn't fly away, so I can only imagine that it went underground. So anyway, he continued walking. Not too long after that, he passed this vast meadow to his right side. And he said he looked over in the middle of this meadow right as the sun was hitting it, and he saw something very shiny, very reflective in the meadow. And he was curious. So he decided to take a little detour, and he walked over to this spot and he looked down, and he said when he got there, the shiny reflective effect sort of disappeared, and instead all he saw was a deep hole in the ground that was a few inches in diameter. So he thought, well, this day is just getting stranger and stranger. Well, he didn't have any success hunting, and so right after it got dark, he was making his way back. And as he was on this little ridge and he got to that field, well, now he could see there was some kind of commotion in that field. He could hear men talking. He could see flashlights waving around. So he very quietly sort of crept out of the woods, and he saw that there was a circle of trucks that were sort of parked around this hole that he had seen earlier. And that there was all these guys were running around shining flashlights and talking about something. And he said, I got to figure out what's going on. So he started walking over toward this spot. He said, but I just took a few steps, and all of a sudden, he said, it sounded like 3 or 4 guys with machine guns just all let loose, and they were firing at this hole. They didn't even notice that he was there. They're shooting the heck out of this hole. And he just hit the deck. He was scared to death. And as soon as he could, he got out of there. And he said, I have no idea how to explain this. What were these military, people doing up there? What was in the ground? Why were they shooting at something? Obviously, whatever's happening at Brown Mountain has gained the interest of some people in the government. In fact, I know a professional photographer who was getting some great pictures of the lights, and he was actually visited by one of these mysterious men in black types who basically bribed him and said, look, if you just forget about this and you stop publishing these pictures, well, we're going to give you this. And I don't want to go into details because this is a true story and I don't want to compromise this guy's privacy. So you think to yourself, all right, well, what are these things? What's the big deal with these balls of light? People see them at a distance, but what happens when, if you get a closer look? Well, listen to this. I was absolutely delighted when I was finally able to hear about and then interview a man named Tommy Hunter, who had a heck of an experience in 1982. Now, Tommy Hunter was what you might call a good old boy, okay? I think he worked as an auto mechanic and, he was just, a very rural guy who lived in that area who certainly had no interest in sensationalizing anything. And he told me that he was up at the overlook one night and had a truly mind-boggling experience. What I think is so amazing about his story is that there were 9 witnesses there, and I talked to most of them, and they all told me the same thing. One of the witnesses actually was, at the time I talked to her, an officer on active duty in the military. And she didn't want her name used because she didn't want people to think she was like, crazy or whatever. So Tommy Hunter, who is dead now, was up there one evening with a group of people who had gone out, just to look for the lights. They had friends and family. And at one point, you have to realize this overlook on 181 is right next to sort of a ravine that goes down to a valley, and Brown Mountain is across the valley. And so they looked over, and up from the valley floats this ball of light. that is about 3 times the size of a basketball. It's sort of, white / kind of yellowish in color. And so it's floating a few feet above the ground. And of course, everybody gasped and ran away from it except for Tommy Hunter. He's like the guy in the movie Fire in the Sky, Travis Walton. He decides, I'm the one who's going to go toward this thing. So he walks up to it, and everybody's screaming at him, get away from that. Are you crazy? And so he walked up, and it's hovering right there in front of him, buzzing slightly, and he decided to touch it. So Tommy Hunter reached out and touched this ball of light. And what happened next really comes from mainly the description of the witnesses, because I think it kind of knocked him out a little bit, because he said the last thing he remembered is feeling an electrical shock, like sticking his finger in a light socket. And then the people who were there watching said that when that happened, the light dimmed slightly, and then he was basically knocked out, and out on the ground, at least for a few moments. But it did not discharge the light. The light was still there for a while. And then the light finally sort of bounced around some more, and it just drifted right back down into the ravine and disappeared in the woods. And so there was definitely something akin to an electrical sensation that he got from touching this thing. So, but again, it didn't permanently hurt him. But he just very matter-of-factly told me about his experience. And you know what? Since then, I have talked to other people, or I've certainly read stories. Like, for example, there was a news story about somebody who had a similar experience. This was a news story. This was a few years ago, I guess. Time flies. I'm going to say 5 or 6 years ago, about some people who were at the overlook and claimed that a light appeared and then chased their car. And they were speeding away, and one of these lights chased their car for like over a mile. There are so many weird stories about what they are that it makes you wonder, okay, are we dealing with something that is a conscious being of light? Or is this just some kind of an amazing natural phenomenon? You have all of these stories about the place being haunted, being a portal. You have cryptids up there like Pumpkin Man, not to be confused with Pumpkinhead, but this sort of, big-headed creature with like kind of a wilted looking body that runs around in the leaves at night. My friend Brett Clark, who's a filmmaker, he took pictures of all kinds of really bizarre contrails from aircraft over top of the mountain. I talked to a friend who said that he had a missing time experience up there. And almost, I think he basically said what happened. It was more of like a space-time distortion, where he's kind of like on one side of the ridge at one point, or on one side of the gorge, and then all of a sudden he's on the other side. And then you have these stories about these big flaming balls of light that people see shooting literally across the gorge that some people describe as like a chariot of fire. And then, when I started camping up there, there were times when at night I would hear what sounded like footsteps in the crunchy, dry autumn leaves. Lots of footsteps, the footsteps of dozens or hundreds of people. And I thought, wow, I wonder if these are the ghosts of some Native Americans that were creeping into battle, just like one of the old legends says, right? All this is running through my head. A Phantasmagoria, a phenomena, is being reported up here. So I'm going to tell you what actually happened when we got serious about camping up there. And the very first time that we saw and videotaped legitimate Brown Mountain lights, and something wild that happened. I to this day, I can't fully explain it. And then finally, when I had my own Well, let's just call it Close Encounter with a Brown Mountain Light. You know, we were covered, my team and I, by all kinds of television programs, Discovery Channel, Travel Channel. One time we were doing a shoot up there with the National Geographic Channel, and Dean Warsing captured a light that was so weird that it was sent to the Princeton Optics Lab for analysis. And Dean was actually, I was standing right next to him when he filmed this. We were at Wiseman's View. He had a night vision camera, which is only supposed to show green imagery. But despite that, a blue light appeared. Yeah, we've never figured that one out. And the blue light went sweeping around the gorge in front of him. And so Nat Geo took his camera and his night vision goggles that were strapped to them and all that stuff and sent them to the Princeton Optics Lab. And they said right there on national TV, quote, "We basically went through all of the wavelengths, starting from ultraviolet and all the way to the near infrared, and we were not able to replicate the blue color. It is unexplained at this point," end quote. How do you like that? Princeton. That's why if you go to joshuapwarren.com, you should click the link to the Paratemporal night vision goggles. That's the only type of night vision that I use when I'm doing paranormal research. It's in my curiosity shop there. Paratemporal night vision. So anyway, what I did was I created this, vacuum chamber, and I said, let's take the angles we see on some of these cliffs around Brown Mountain, and let's emulate those angles with these electrodes, and we'll take some of the air out of the chamber so that a lower voltage will act like a bigger voltage because it has less resistance. And when we had all these different angles of electrodes intersecting, voila, boom, I was in the lab with Charles Yost and Robert McGee, and here we have this ball of light that appears hovering in the middle of this chamber. It was a magical moment. And I would have been just elated to end the story right there. But the real mind blower is that here we are standing there in the laboratory looking at this ball of light, and we start talking about whether or not this ball of light might be similar to what people see when they see UFOs. And then right there before our eyes, this ball of light transforms into a saucer shape, as if it is a conscious, sensitive ball of light. Now, that ball of light was made of what we call plasma, the fourth state of matter. Look it up if you're not sure what I'm talking about. Obviously a solid is a state, like ice is a state. Liquid is a state like water. Gas is a state like steam. And then there is this fourth state called plasma. Plasma is the state that a candle flame exists in, or a lightning bolt exists in. And it seemed to me that this demonstrated that whatever is causing what we see, the things around Brown Mountain apparently are in the plasma state. And this made the cover of the Electric Spacecraft Journal, a science journal, and it was published October of 2004. And I believe that we are some of the very few paranormal investigators who made the cover of a science journal. So I'd been talking for a long time about how I thought that whatever was causing these things, that they were something like a plasma. And Ed Phillips, he is the director for tourism in Burke County. He started doing these symposiums. The first one was in 2012. And at that time, the media had always been trying to sort of pit me against Dr. Dan Caton from Appalachian State University, because they would always say, like, well, here's Joshua Warren, the believer, he's the wacky believer, and now here is the skeptical scientist from Appalachian State University. And Dr. Caton would always say, like, in the beginning, well, these might be just, illusions, or, some kind of starlight being reflected or refracted, all that kind of stuff. And I was always saying, I think these might be plasmas. And then, and it made matters worse. Like when we did our symposium, Dr. Caton would stand there and look down his nose at me and all these forest rangers and physicists and all these lifelong residents who had observed the lights. And he would publicly say things like, "I'm a real scientist. I don't just play one on TV. And I've never seen the lights." So you get the picture of like, the situation here, and, which is obviously, I mean, you're talking about, I guess a real scientist gets to spend taxpayer money, unlike us sort of self-funded independent enthusiasts who camp up there all the time, but have trouble telling the difference between a campfire and a four-wheeler and a flashlight and a bunch of spectacular multicolored lights that bounce on a sheer cliff and then float into the sky while producing radio interference for a mile. So, a lot of people were bothered by this dynamic, but even he started saying, well, I'm thinking maybe this is more of a plasma thing, like ball lightning. And I'm going, yeah, exactly. I think that we're finding some common ground here. And so as more and more interest picked up, like I mentioned before, the overlook got cleaned up. There's a nice sign there, picnic tables there. And I started looking at some of the factors that might be in common when people see the lights most prominently. And here is what we kind of came up with, all right, to predict an appearance of the lights. There are many complex variables involved here. But it seems like that most of the time people have really good sightings in late October or the first half of November. That may be because there is some kind of a temperature change that is dramatic. It's the difference between the daytime temperature and the nighttime temperature is more pronounced, and that might cause some kind of a contraction and expansion of the rocks around the mountain, especially due to the fact that the mountain is almost completely encircled by thrust faults, and these are faults that sort of slide up and down on top of each other and underneath each other. It gives it some flexibility. So it's like the mountain's dynamic, Second, it seems to do, or it seems to be a good thing if it's either raining or a rain has recently occurred. And my feeling is that might be because the mountain is acting kind of like a big capacitor that stores up small electrical charges over time to a critical point and then sort of discharges them. So in other words, as water flows through the mountain, through those crags and tunnels, it kind of might build up a charge on some of those rock layers. And some of those layers are conductive and some are non-conductive, which means literally the mountain might act like a big capacitor that stores up energy, similar to a battery. Next is if the KP index is at a level 5 or above. Now, I know I might lose you on that one. The KP index is a measurement of how disturbed the Earth's magnetic field is, the magnetosphere. It's always wobbling and changing around. And so we're dealing with a larger system here than just what meets the eye. And so you can go to brownmountainlights.com or just jump on the internet and do a search for KP index, and it will show you what the reading is for today. And if it's a 5 or above, that means there's a lot of disturbance. There's a lot of action happening, and that might induce more of an electrical charge in the Earth because the magnetic field wobbles around, and that makes more electrical current flow through the rocks. And the last thing is if there is an increased level of carbon in the air. And I say that because whenever we've had forest fires nearby, the lights seem to be more pronounced. Or when you have more campers out there burning campfires, the lights seem to be more pronounced. And so those may be 4 factors. And I'm not saying that you can't see the lights year round. I mean, I had some good friends. One of them just recently passed away, and they would go up there every summer, every July, and spend every day at Wiseman's View and around the big rocks there, Table Rock and Hawksbill, and they would get some amazing images of the lights. But those are, I think, the 4 things, and those are repeated for you at brownmountainlights.com. 1, If you want the best chances, view the area in late October or the first half of November. Number 2, if it's raining or it has recently rained. Number 3, the KP index is 5 or above. And then last, if there is an extraordinary amount of carbon in the air. But guess what finally happened? Yes, even Dr. Caton and his crew saw and documented the Brown Mountain Lights. This happened, it was announced in the Charlotte Observer August 13th of 2016. WLOS.com says scientists from Appalachian State University believe they have captured images of the elusive Brown Mountain Lights. It goes on to say that glowing lights were captured simultaneously by 2 time-lapse digital video cameras near the mountain, which is located just north of Morganton. The cameras are operated by Daniel Caton and his colleague Lee Hawkins of the Physics and Astronomy Department of Appalachian State. And in that 2016 report, Dr. Caton said this is the first time we've had a dual detection, the phenomena on both cameras. It was something out there. It came on and went back off virtually instantly 4 times over several minutes. We've eliminated all the things that are likely man-made natural sources, so we are left with no real explanation other than it's whatever the lights may actually be, end quote. So you see, we've all found that if you spend enough time out there, eventually you're going to see this phenomenon. But here's what ticks me off, okay? This is one of the reasons I say you have to always distinguish very clearly between the TV business and real research. In 2019, I was up at Brown Mountain because I was hired to be part of a major television production. And they were bragging about the fact that they had a guy there who was a big licensed drone operator. He had the biggest, fanciest drone I'd ever seen. And I said, man, this is fantastic. To have a drone like this. Now, if a light appears in the distance, zoom over there. So all day long, he gets all these sweeping shots with the drone. And then nighttime rolls around and we're out there at Wiseman's View. And I was thinking there's very little chance that the lights are going to appear because over the 15 years I was camping up there, I only had a good sighting maybe half a dozen times. But lo and behold, we lucked out. As we were there, a little after sundown, I'm standing next to Forrest Connor. We look over and holy cow, I can see, I know it, the real Brown Mountain Lights start to appear. And I said to the guy with the drone, fly it over there. Fly it right up to them. Let's see. And he goes, no, I can't do that. I said, what are you talking about? This whole TV show is 1 hour on a major network about solving the mystery of the Brown Mountain Lights. I said, there they are. You have the drone. Fly the drone right over. He says, yeah, they told me I couldn't fly it after dark or I'll get a big fine. I was like, well, why are we here then? I told the guy, I will pay your fine. I'll pay the damn fine. Just turn it on, fly it over. He wouldn't do it. You know how frustrating that is to be in my position and to see something like that that's been a mystery for, hundreds of years. And there's a guy with a professional TV quality drone as part of a professional TV crew and has this miraculous golden moment and won't fly it over. You know how frustrating that is for me? So, listen. I've been to Marfa. I've seen the Marfa lights. I think it's a different thing. When you get close to the Marfa lights, they tend to disappear, like they might be an optical illusion. There's a place in Norway called Hestelen, where there's a very similar phenomenon to the Brown Mountain Lights, but instead of it being on a mountain, it's in a valley. And I think that places like Brown Mountain are portals, okay? They produce so much energy that the lights are just the most obvious illustrations. But you have a myriad of experiences, and they're all byproducts of a place that conducts this kind of electrical and electromagnetic energy. The Canadian scientist Michael Persinger has said that when people come into contact with electromagnetic frequencies at a certain rate or at a certain magnitude, they can start to have paranormal experiences. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe some of these are what we consider fairies, like conscious beings of light. Maybe these lights are coming from the ends of wormholes to another dimension. We're looking in the window. The author Paige Bryant, in her classic 1994 book called The Spiritual Reawakening of the Great Smoky Mountains, said that Brown Mountain is a vortex. It is a place where energy is passing back and forth. And so is Table Rock and Hawksbill, these two big points right near there. So again, it goes back to the idea that this is some kind of a phantasmagoria. The lights are one expression of this, but it doesn't explain it all. And the government definitely studies this stuff for some reason. So before we're out of time here, let me read to you the conclusion that I wrote in my free booklet about this that you can download right now if you go to brownmountainlights.com. I wrote, whatever they are, the Brown Mountain Lights remind us that Earth is a powerful and dynamic machine. NASA has shown us that the very gravitational field is an inconsistent and irregular force about its surface, and enhanced imaging techniques reveal spectacular, eerie flashes of light and electricity in and all around the planet. Each second, somewhere on the globe, bolts of lightning strike the ground, banging the earth like a giant drum and strumming out cosmic harmonies. Whether the lights begin with something geologic, atmospheric, or truly interdimensional, there is a greater story here. If we strip away all the opinions, we ultimately have a place where, for over a century, humans from all walks of life have essentially described something simple. Weird lights on a dark mountainside. The geologists focus on piezoelectricity. The chemists focus on gas. The astronomers focus on optical illusions. The physicists focus on plasma. The spiritualists focus on ghosts. The UFO hunters focus on flying saucers. And the conspiracy buffs focus on mind-bending plots. Yet all the while, the songwriters, poets, and artists are just as inspired by their own personal, multicolored visions. The mountain is a phantasmagoria of strange tales, but ultimately, it is a vast blank slate. It is the tracing board for all manner of human adventure, exploration, wonder, and imagination, regardless of what they are. The mere concept of the Brown Mountain Lights makes them important. And in this internet age, when the whole universe seems right at our fingertips, how refreshing it is to have a good old-fashioned mystery still quietly waiting to be solved right here in our own backyards.